Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to delve into something a little unsettling? We're talking Hansel and Gretel today. But not just the, surface level. You guys have brought up some really thought-provoking questions.
Yeah, it's amazing how these classic children's stories can have such dark undercurrents.
Exactly. I mean, on the surface, it's all candy houses and witches. But, think about it for a second. Why would any parent abandon their children like that? Not once, but twice.
Right, you'd think the first time would be enough of a lesson, but
And then there's the whole stepmother and witch thing. Their disappearances are a little too convenient, don't you think? Almost like,
ooh, yeah. Let's start with that abandonment, though. The story really emphasizes how desperate things were, right? Like, that famine was
are
brutal.
we talking about building their own coffins?
Exactly. Total sense of doom. So, as horrible as it is, the story kind of suggests the father saw it as this tragic choice, like a sacrifice. Maybe he thought if two were gone, the other two might actually stand a chance.
It's terrifying logic, but I guess. In that situation, who knows how you'd think. He does come across as really weak, though, just going along with whatever his wife says.
Good point. The stepmother's definitely the one pushing the plan, no question. Maybe he just couldn't stand up to her. Or maybe that desperation just overwhelmed everything. We also have to consider the time period these stories come from, right?
Yeah.
Back then, as awful as it sounds, child abandonment. Well, it happened, especially when poverty was that extreme.
So even though it's a fairy tale, there's this dark reflection of reality there. It's disturbing to think how many real-life tragedies might be behind stories like this.
Yeah, for sure. The darkness in these tales often reflects the darkness of the times they came from.
Okay, but now on to that stepmother-witch connection. They both disappear at basically the same time, which just feels suspicious. It's almost as if,
Like they were the same person. I can see that. Maybe the witch is like a symbolic version of the stepmother's cruelty. First, the kids escape her, but then they run into this even scarier version of that same evil out in the woods.
whoa. So the forest itself is reflecting the darkness in their family. That's deep and kind of creepy.
Right, but we could also see them as totally separate threats, both just happening to fit that evil woman role that pops up all the time in fairy tales. It doesn't make them less scary, they're just different kinds of danger, but it's a different way to think about how they're connected.
Yeah, and it's that ambiguity that makes it so interesting to think about. Are they two sides of the same coin or just two separate bad things happening to these kids? Makes you wonder about all the different ways evil can show up in the world. And speaking of evil, that gingerbread house. You pointed out how fancy it was, loaded with sweets and treasure. Where did all that come from? It's kind of disturbing when you really think about it.
The story doesn't say outright, but the little details definitely hint at something bad. Her house isn't just full of candy, it's over the top, almost like she's showing off her wealth to attract victims.
Like a trap.
Exactly. And then she sees Hansel and Gretel and says, now I have them, they won't get away. That sounds like she's done this before, right? Like it's a routine for her.
It's like she's running a whole child-catching operation. That gingerbread house is less cute cottage and more gilded cage all of a sudden. And that treasure? You're thinking what I'm thinking, right?
That it belonged to other kids. It's a chilling thought, but it fits with what the story's hinting at. Imagine these kids maybe carrying their family's few valuables. They see this amazing house, they think it's salvation, and then, well, let's just say we're better off not knowing the details of how the witch operates. It's grim, no doubt. But, even with all that, the story also shows how tough these kids are, how they face all this horror and keep going.
Yeah, true. They don't just sit around waiting to be rescued. They're trying to survive this whole time.
Exactly. Think about Hansel trying to leave those pebbles, then the breadcrumbs. And even when that fails, he doesn't give up. He keeps telling Gretel they'll find a way out.
And Gretel, she's younger, but she's brave. And smart. She's the one who tricks the witch in the end, right?
Exactly. They work together, they use their brains, and they escape something truly awful. It's like, within all this darkness, their story is showing how strong kids can be, how they can survive even when things are unbelievably cruel.
Powerful message, especially when you think about how tough life was back then. Kids were so vulnerable, so their story is kind of a hopeful sign. No matter how bad things get, there's this spark, this will to survive.
And they don't just survive, they get away with the witch's loot. Almost like the story is saying there's some justice in the world. Getting back what was stolen, not just for them, but maybe for all the kids who were hurt by her.
Yeah, it's satisfying to think about that. It's not just escaping. It's like they're fixing something wrong. bringing
Mm.
some balance back to this world that seems so hard on innocent people.
Which brings us back to how many victims there might have been. The story leaves that open, but all those clues. The witch being so sure Hansel and Gretel wouldn't escape, how she's lying in wait, all that treasure. It points to a lot of sadness in her past.
Yeah, like Hansel and Gretel getting away was lucky. A lot of others probably, well, didn't. It adds this whole other layer of darkness, doesn't it?
It does. But even with all that, there's this strong message about hope, about being clever. Hansel and Gretel's story tells us that even when things seem impossible, we can fight back. We can be smarter than those who try to use us and come out the other side, maybe even stronger than before.
It really makes you think, huh? Even these stories we think of as simple, for kids, they've got all this deeper meaning, these echoes of like real struggles and how people overcome them.
Absolutely. And Hansel and Gretel, yeah, it's dark, but in the end, it's about resilience. There's bad stuff out there, no question. Hunger, people being abandoned, people who hurt kids. But there's also bravery, using your head, and that connection between brother and sister, that's unbreakable.
And that's why it sticks with people, right? It speaks to something we all kind of feel,
Yeah.
that we can make it through tough stuff.
Exactly. They go through some truly awful things, but they never give up. They've got each other, they think outside the box, and they get back home safe. And not just that, they come back with the means to make a better life. Maybe even help others who've had it rough too.
It's like they're not just escaping their own nightmare, but fighting back against all the bad in the world.
That's a good way to put it. Their story becomes this, like, light in the darkness, showing that even when things are super bleak, we can fight back. We can outsmart those who try to take advantage and come out the other side. Maybe even stronger because of it.
So to all our deep divers out there, as we wrap up this look at Hansel and Gretel, remember those little bits of wisdom we found. Watch out for people who make promises that sound too good to be true. Don't be afraid to leave your own trail, metaphorically speaking, of course.
Easy.
And most importantly, trust that gut feeling.
And hey, if you're ever lost in the woods and you find a house that's a little too perfect, maybe just keep on walking.
Until next time, deep divers. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop looking for those hidden meanings, even in the stories you think you know.
Thank you for joining CMF Conspiracies podcast. If you have a conspiracy you wish for us to deep dive into, please send your topic to our email address or leave it in the comments.